Hello and welcome back to the Out of Spec Podcast. We are here today with another interview review with Team Ioniq 6. We took 10 vehicles, 9 EVs, 1 combustion vehicle across the United States from Seattle to Boston on the I-90 surge. And today, I have Team Ioniq 6. How are you guys doing?
Awesome.
Great.
Awesome. All right, so today we're going to get in the nitty gritty, all of your fun stories, your impressions, some of the stats, and then we'll kind of have some more tidbits towards the end. But let's start off with some first impressions. Corbin, I'll go to you first. When Kyle first called you, texted you, say, "Hey, Corbin, I got an Ioniq 6. You got to drive this thing from Seattle to Boston." What was going through your head?
Well, I was super excited. First of all, he wanted me to drive my Ioniq 6 SE rear-wheel drive out to Colorado and then bring it up to Seattle for the race because it's the exact spec he wanted for the trip. Hyundai wanted to give us a limited all-wheel drive, which obviously is the least efficient of any of them. So I was super excited about that because I've had it for 6 months at that point, and I only put a few hundred miles on it. So I was really anxious to put some miles on it, and it would have been a perfect experience to do that. But Hyundai found us one. But yeah, great opportunity to really experience what it's like to road trip one of these bad boys.
Awesome. What about you, Lacey?
Yeah, so for this one, I had actually reached out to Kyle because I had just left my job and I was like, hey, give me something to do. And he was like, oh, we're actually doing another road trip. So if you want to join on that, I'm putting that together in like the next month or something. And I was like, yes, please sign me up. I'm not doing anything. And the timing actually worked out really well to where I left for Seattle the day after my last day at my other job. So not as exciting as the first road trip that I did where he Snapchatted me like, hey, do you want to go on an adventure? This one I was like, Kyle, please give me something to do. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Mike though. Mike, how did you get involved in this?
So my connection actually starts with Dave and goes back to the ocean to ocean race with the trucks. Dave had reached out, a couple days before they were doing that and said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yeah, man, what's up?" And he goes, "Here's what we're doing with the trucks. Can you make it?" And it was like a day later. I had some buddies coming in for a ski trip. I couldn't do it. And so as I was catching up with Dave in the weeks and months that followed, I just expressed how bummed I was. I would have loved to do it. It would have been awesome. And then Dave texted me when this was coming together and said, "Hey, there might be something else shaping up. What do you think? Are you in?" And I was actually going to go on vacation with the family that weekend. I'm like, "I'll cancel it. I'm not missing this thing twice." And then Kyle, he goes, "All right, I'm going to connect you with Kyle." Kyle called me and was like, "I want to make sure you fully understand what you're getting into, here." And I'm like, "I'm in, let's do it." So the cars bounced around a little bit where I was, but in the end of the day, very happy with the team and the car I ended up in.
Awesome. Before we get into questions, let's try to introduce ourselves. So I'll kind of go right back to you, Mike. If you could tell us a bit about yourselves, your familiarity with electric vehicles and road tripping.
Absolutely. So I work in outside sales in the beverage alcohol industry, and my daily driver is an F-150 Lightning, which has been my first electric vehicle. To me, the EV world has been kind of the cross section of technology and transportation. I'm not a big car guy. I'm a bigger tech guy. So the two of those things like blending together was my kind of ramp into it. And I'll routinely, I mean, this was certainly the longest I have ever EV road tripped, but it's pretty common for me to go 500-600 miles, every other month or something in a trip. So pretty good with, having to do my own route planning as Ford's not a great route planner either and figure out where to go. And I've kind of learned over my time with it, point A to point B is pretty easy nowadays, right? It's when you don't know when and what point C will be is where it still gets a little dicey. It's just like to end on 10%, that's fine when you're back home charging. But if you end there at 10% and then you end up having to go another 100 miles somewhere else, that's where it can get dicey. So that's kind of my experience with it, and love driving, put a lot of miles on, and I've driven 3/4 of that route previously, from Montana back to Connecticut. So it was fun to do the whole route.
That's sweet. I'll pass it to Lacey.
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, some people listening are familiar with me. My name's Lacey, and I have a big background in just community engagement, teaching people about EVs. I worked with a nonprofit called Drive Clean Colorado. And so I hosted a lot of events, getting people to test drive EVs for the first time. So I know a lot of just the basics of EVs, not really the specs, even though I'm great friends with Kyle and he literally runs the Out of Spec studios. So I like to join these kinds of adventures so that I can learn myself and also share all of my learnings with everybody that's also just getting into this. I had a great conversation with somebody that just got a Nissan Aria like 3 days ago, and so I just love sharing all of my knowledge, everything that I'm learning from being involved with Kyle, and I'm actually moving on to my next adventure in Maryland. I'll be working with the Maryland Energy Administration, so really excited for that, and so I'm still not done with EVs.
That's awesome. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
And then I'll go to you, Corbin. Of course, do I even really need to introduce you?
So I'm Corbin. I run the Ioniq YouTube channel. A lot of you might have already seen my videos, but I own an Ioniq 5. I have for almost 3 years now, and I also lease an Ioniq 6. So I'm just one Ioniq shy of having the Trio, but the Ioniq 9 has not come out yet. But yeah, I just cover everything related to Hyundai, Kia, Genesis, EVs, ownership, tips and tricks, reviews of accessories and stuff. I run a pretty active Facebook group for troubleshooting these cars. They're just not perfect. There's always issues with them, and people come to me with questions. I'm fielding a lot of emails and stuff. So it's a lot of work, but happy to do it to keep people driving these cars understanding what they're actually doing with them.
Sweet. So you're our veteran for this race, really, when it
I
comes to
guess so.
Ioniq. Awesome. Let's go straight into the numbers. So first to start out, so you per stop, per charge, you guys averaged about 50 kilowatt hours. Your lowest was 26 kilowatt hours delivered, and your highest, you actually hit 60 a couple times. Do you guys know exactly what happens around 60 kilowatt hours delivered? I mean, this is with you guys arriving at about 5%. So, 60 kilowatt hours, not great at math, but you guys could tell me what was happening right at that 60 kilowatt hour mark that made you think, all right, on to the next charger.
Well, that's close to a 10 to 80% charge. That's really the sweet spot for Hyundai's EVs. Once you get over 70%, the charging rate starts to taper off. And then once you hit 80%, there's something that Bjorn Nyland, who's a Tesla YouTuber, he likes to call the Korean siesta, where it kind of balances out some of the cells and checks some things, and it drops to about 4 kilowatts for a minute or two. And it can be a little startling. So that's just time completely shot. So once you hit 80%, that's the last point you would want to charge to on a road trip, in my personal opinion. But we very rarely even came close to 80%. Most, like you said, most of ours were stopping at about 60% or so.
Perfect. And average date on arrival, you guys were about 5%, 4.65 is what I got. Often arriving as close to 3%. You guys hit 0% multiple times. So I got to ask, what was going through your head there? I mean, clearly you guys trust the car, but yeah, what made you guys want to risk it getting as low as 0%?
I can
Yeah.
chime in. Sorry, Mike. Yeah, well, Corbin, he's just the expert and he understands the buffer. Like he has this car. And so Corbin, what was it? Like a 8-mile buffer? I can't remember what it was, but
Yeah, it's around 10 miles. Depends on the speed you're going. If you're at lower speed, you could probably get 15, 18 miles past zero. But at the elevated speeds we were doing, I think the most we ever did past zero was like 6 or 7 miles around there. It was less than 10, but I remember, I
yeah.
think I was at Chamberlain, South Dakota. We were getting to that station and we were riding on fumes. And that was the point where the accelerator pedal started to get squishy. We had already dropped our speed. I think we did 5 miles per hour for a while and then dropped it down to 10 miles per hour and possibly even more, if memory serves me right. But that's a good example of a time when, yeah, it would have been better to add another 5% at the previous charger. This way we wouldn't have to have lowered our speed, because that probably cost us 5-10 minutes in time right there. And as you guys know, if you've watched the results, we weren't that far behind the Model 3.
Yeah, so I think there is enough buffer to not give me too much anxiety, but there was that one clip where we had just pulled up to the station I think Mike had his like head out the window almost. He said, "We have been on 0% for miles." And right when we pulled up, we were so thankful that we made it. But for the most part, all the stations, all the stops that I remember, like we did pretty great with planning. Like Mike did amazing calculations. Corbin has the experience. And so for me being not an expert in all of this, I was just chilling in the background. Maybe that's why I was able to sleep so well. But yeah, Mike, do you have anything to say to that one?
Yeah, I think the looking back at it was fun to kind of watch, what we were thinking at the time. And I think it was our first stretch where we were trying to get out to what was our first stop, Corbin?
Spokane.
Spokane. And there was a couple different options that we could get to, and we were looking at it. And I mean, we went climb it off, getting there and starting to learn where the guessometer was going to be. And I remember the next charging stop, we were planning out how much we want to get there. And Lacey popped in and she's like, "How much do we need to run AC the whole time?" Because it got hot. And then about halfway through, I think I made a comment to you, Corbin, in Billings, Montana, that how impressed I was with the guessometer and the calculation of the car. And it caught up really, really quickly. We obviously had to account for, we weren't dealing with a lot of wind, which was helpful. We had to account a little bit manually for elevation. And, the comfort level we had, with that one exception where I don't think we accounted for elevation enough in heading into Chamberlain where we got dicey, all of it was pretty strategic, right? And our choice to leave at the percentages we did were less based on, hey, this is when the car is tapering or we're seeing different speeds. And it was more based on, this is all we think we need to get to the next stop, which is really our only other option. And in the end of the day, it was a race, right? So how quick can we do it? And every minute we spend charging, is one less minute we leave on the table. So
awesome. I'm glad you guys mentioned Spokane. So, right, was through Spokane. Spokane is right on the edge, right close to Idaho. For a lot of people, this would have been the first charging site.
It was
Yeah.
just when you started that last bit there.
So yeah, Spokane Spokane is really on the edge of Washington, right next to Idaho, and so that was really the first charge for a lot of vehicles. So why did you guys, if you can kind of remind me again, kind of read it through that, why Spokane versus kind of edging on through? I mean, many of the vehicles went straight all the way through Washington without having to stop, and yeah, I'm just curious.
We would have had to hypermile to get to Idaho. I mean, we got to Spokane with 5%. That originally going into the day, Idaho was our long shot, but even with hitting some traffic, I forget where that was, but we were in bumper to bumper traffic for at least 15, 20 minutes. And even with that, it was still a long shot to get to Idaho. Unless we were doing 50 miles per hour the entire drive, I don't think we could have possibly made it.
Yeah, we kept looking at it on the fly with a couple other locations. There was actually 2 in Spokane, and we kept bouncing back and forth of which one would have been the ideal one in Spokane to go to too. So, at the time it just felt like, and I mean, we were even running Climb It Off at that point. I think, hindsight, that was probably, a little bit on our first leg, an overreaction. We probably could have made it there with Climb It On and probably would have pulled in at 3%. But, first stretch with the car, the adrenaline's running. Last thing we want to do is find ourselves on the side of the road and stop one. It would have been a very slow ride for the rest of the 1,800 miles left to go.
Okay. And average state of charge on departure, so you guys charge up about 68.41%, right? That seems right on par between hitting that 80 mark and lowest 60. Took you guys 48 hours and 51 minutes to get from Seattle all the way to Boston. What did you guys think of that number? Did you think it was going to be a lot higher, lower? If we actually go to a better route planner estimates, it was showing that the Ioniq 6 would take 47 hours. But yeah, what were your impressions on that? Did you think it would take as long, maybe less?
I don't really know.
Yeah, so
I remember looking at a better route planner, and you really have to play with ABRP, and you can get massive swings and time estimates depending on what you do with it. I'm probably never going to trust a better route planner ever again after doing this trip. But I mean, I feel like that's a pretty solid number. I mean, you saw how close us and the Model 3 were. I mean, the Model 3 is in a sense the benchmark for a small electric sedan in the US. And this kind of just makes me think that the Ioniq 6 is just as good. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's lacking in some other areas like software and efficiency, but
Auto dimming mirror.
what's that?
Auto dimming mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that, well, honestly, from the start, I had no idea what to expect, but you said 47 hours is what a better route planner said. We did it in almost 49 hours, so 2 hour difference is kind of surprising to me. Like being on this trip, seeing how efficient we were at each charging stop, I'm surprised we were longer than that estimate because I thought we did an amazing job. So that kind of stands out to me. I guess kind of like what Corbin is saying, don't always trust it. You can, I don't know, you'll have to plan for a little bit longer maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I
For
think
something,
on a drive that long, a better route planner is optimal across the entire country, right? So
exactly.
anytime, one thing that slows you up anywhere is extrapolated across the entire distance. So I had planned out ahead of time, not knowing the vehicle at all and having no experience with it. I had mapped it out. I had a little file that showed each of the ideal better route planner charging stops and specifically the time we would be at each one to follow it. So I was kind of watching along as we were going, and we were pretty close to that estimate for most of it. And we were probably within an hour of what that said. So, I think it was on expectation for about as optimal a conditions as possible. I think the thing that really surprised me is that we didn't really encounter a huge traffic jam anywhere. There was a couple places we slowed down, but nothing that really ate up time that way. It's funny, the charging felt a lot smoother while we were in it, but watching the charging back and everybody kind of looking at it felt a little choppier than I remember. But yeah, overall, it was a pretty smooth trip.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm talking about the Model 3. Did you guys expect to compete this close?
At the start, I didn't think so because for 2,000 miles, it was always at least 45 minutes ahead of us. And I was just like, I don't know how we're going to catch that. We're doing perfect charging stops almost every time. I mean, after the fact now, I've calculated how much time was lost just due to fumbling with the EA app and getting charging started, that we lost 10, 15 minutes just fiddling with the EA chargers. So I didn't know how we were going to make up time. And I still don't really know what Model 3 did that kind of brought them so much closer to us. Do you guys know why Model 3 kind of slowed down? Was it the Dunkin' Donuts stop?
I was just going to say that's exactly what it was. All 4 minutes that they spent there, I think, is what really brought them closer to us. Honestly, I have no idea. I don't know why we were so close, but I was really surprised looking at the very first clip that we shot in the parking lot at Starbucks headquarters. We're getting asked, like, who do you think your strongest competitors will be? And if memory serves me right, I don't think we knew we'd be competing so strongly with like the Tesla, but mainly with you, Isaiah, like in the EQS. We were like neck and neck most of the time. Like we kept pulling up at the charging stops, like so many of them, like almost at the same time. And like we saw you guys so much throughout the whole trip. And I was really surprised that we were so close to you guys, at least in the beginning, and nobody really saw that happening.
Without Sebastian's chronic speeding, I don't know if we would have been such big nemesis with the EQS. I feel like we probably would have seen him a lot less at the Chargers.
Let's actually talk about this, the rivalry between the EQS and Ioniq 6. So I have this charging stop marked here. So Missoula, and you guys say charging rate crashed when EQS plugged in. Yeah, what was kind of going through your minds there? I mean, I remember we pulled into the charging stop after you guys, and then we left before you guys. It's a kind of an interesting switch.
No, I think we bailed. Yeah, because our original plan on this one was at Missoula, we were going to skip Butte and we were going to go to Bozeman. That was our plan. Yeah. We were getting a great charge. Everything was ripping. You guys showed up. I think you guys plugged into one that didn't work, then came plugged into one next to us, and we dropped down to 30 kilowatts. And this was the only time we dropped rate where we didn't try to reconnect again and get it started because we didn't want to lose that time at that point. So we audibled. We knew we had more than enough to get to Butte. So that, if you noticed, I think that was one of our highest state of charge arrivals into Butte at 10%, because it wasn't our original plan. It was just an audible on the fly when we got a bad charging rate. And then every other time that happened, we just plugged back in and it started charging just fine again.
Okay, perfect.
It had happened a few times though, didn't it? Where EQS plugged in and then that derated us significantly. And then didn't it also happen once without anybody plugging in? Like it just went down to 30 out of nowhere. Am I remembering this correctly? I know it was a long time ago.
Yeah, that happened in Mishawaka, Indiana, and that one was definitely thermal throttling, because I remember looking at car scanner and seeing that our thermals on the battery were approaching 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the point where it's going to start slowing down. And I didn't look at car scanner too religiously at all the charging stops, so whether it was them plugging in or thermals, it doesn't really matter at this point. But yeah, it happened, and it definitely slowed us down.
Yeah, I know you say it doesn't really matter, but I am really curious. Do you think somebody plugging in next to another person at an Electrify America station will automatically derate? Do you think it really was just the thermals and it just happened to happen whenever they plugged in? What was the cause of it? Because there's so many factors involved and inconsistent results. Like, why did we keep derating?
Typically, it's pedestals that are right next to each other that are shared power. And looking back at the footage, I'm pretty sure some of the times it happened, we would be on the first set of chargers and they would be on the second set, 3 through 4. We were on 1 through 2. So I don't think it was power sharing or splitting or whatever Electrify America calls it. So I'm not really sure. He just thinks it was straight up just dumb luck that they showed up right at that time, plugged in right when we were maxing out our thermals.
Yeah, I mean, we spent the first, I'd say, 3/4 of the race thinking it was the other vehicles charging us or causing us to do it, right? And then the last third of the race, I think we all thought it was thermals. It was interesting, Corbin. I text you after watching it, and every single time it happened, it was right after somebody else plugged in. It's like 1 time, okay, 2 times, sure, 4 times. It's like, that's a pretty big coincidence that literally the only time over a 3,100 mile trip and the 16 or 18 charging stops that we did, the only time we had issues was immediately following somebody else plugging in next to us. That seems pretty coincidental for it to happen that much.
Yeah, I saw Kyle hanging out back there. Why don't you ask Kyle? Because he knows these chargers better than any of us. I don't know how they share power.
Yeah, I think they actually left to go test the Lucid, but yeah, if anybody wants to know, I'm actually at the Out of Spec hub in Fort Collins. This is not my mic. This is an Out of Spec mic. This is an Out of Spec background. You guys will probably see it more in the future. They just got furniture yesterday, and it's such a nice setup. So hopefully all of you guys will see it eventually. But yeah, I'll have to ask him later on because yeah, like Mike was saying, I feel like there's a statistically significant difference like in our experiences. It did happen one time where nobody plugged in and it still derated us, but like it just kept happening every time you guys plugged in, and that's what made it such a strong rivalry in my mind with you guys, because you guys kept derating us. So but like, was it even you guys? We don't really know. So hopefully we'll figure that out in the future.
Yeah, as we get more teams on, it'll definitely be something that I'll ask more of to kind of see what other people were experiencing on that front. But it was just hilarious plugging in, at least from our perspective. I know for you, it must have been like, what the hell's going on? But for us, plugging in and you guys derating, we're like, oh, this is just friendly rivalry there.
Yeah, I think that my favorite one watching back was in Billings when it happened to us and we had to charge, deep to make that stretch to Gillette, Wyoming. And then we plugged back in and got it going. You guys were getting a good charge. And then Jordan accidentally hit cancel and stopped the charger and shut himself off. That was a great moment of redemption for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, these cars were a lot closer than I expected. I mean, there were a lot of parts where we had the Plaid, the Lucid, Ioniq, and EQS all at the same time. I think that happened twice. And yeah, a lot closer than expected. But the Model 3, looking at the map as we got closer to Boston, seeing how you guys got closer and closer to the Model 3, and how we angrily kept getting behind you guys because we were so close for so long. So we were expecting like, oh, we'd be right there. But you guys pedaled on through. And yeah, funny. We'll have to talk about this more, but I want to talk about some of the stories. So you guys did get pulled over. You also got a cracked windshield. So I'll first start off with the cracked windshield. Do you guys know exactly what happened there?
Yeah, it happened somewhere between Spokane and Missoula. I had to fill out the accident report for Jordan. So we kind of determined based on footage that's about where it happened. And it just grew. It started out as a small rock chip and then just grew across the windshield. I know when Jordan had it back in Colorado and they were doing their 10% challenge and stuff, it was like almost completely splitting the entire windshield. So it just kept getting worse and worse. But I guess Hyundai forgave us because I don't think Out of Spec got billed for it.
Yeah, I remember hearing a really loud thud, and then it wasn't like on the windshield to where we could see from the inside of the car. So we're like, oh, maybe we're fine. Like it like hit us, but it didn't leave a crack. And then when we got out at the next stop, I think that's when we saw it. And then yeah, it just kept growing. It got so long. And yeah, I was watching that 10% challenge. I thought it was hilarious. So I don't know who was driving, but it doesn't really matter. Like, you can't really help like a rock chip. So yeah, I thought that was fun. It added character, to the car
Yeah.
throughout the drive. But
Thanks.
yeah, sorry, Hyundai. Thank you for letting us use the car again.
And then getting pulled over. What happened there?
Yeah, we were coming off of Sioux Falls, and we were getting right back onto the highway. I was just accelerating. I was driving that stretch. It was a 65 mile an hour zone. I was accelerating up to 75. I saw two cops on the left side of the road, backed it off kind of right away, saw them pull out right after us, followed us for probably a couple miles, and then they lit us up, pulled us over, and came up to the car, and I'm handing them the license, the registration, doing all that. And as you guys encountered, they can't really look up these dealer VINs. So we got a California plate. I'm in South Dakota. I got a Connecticut license, and I'm saying, it's a press car. And this guy's like, I have no idea what to do with this. He's like, can you step out, come sit in my car with me while I figure it out? So he was nice the whole time, asked a bunch of questions about what we were doing. I think once he realized there was layers to the story and I wasn't just, making something up with a stolen Ioniq 6, he let us, then he just had personal questions. And I'm like, buddy, I hate to be rude, man, but it's a race, man. Got to go. And he just looked up. He got me going 74 in a 65. And he's like, I'll give you a verbal warning, be safe. See you later. So I think it cost us, 8 minutes?
Mike, what was like going through your mind though, right when he asked you to sit in the car?
That was probably the only moment where I was like, ooh, this feels weird, right? Like I got to get out of the car and I got to go sit. But he was, if he had any sort of attitude or had looked disgruntled, I probably would have been more nervous. I don't recall being that nervous because I think he just was disarming, right? He had a smile on his face. He was polite, did all the things by the book. And I think he just, three people in a car. He's not sure what's going on. He can't find the VIN. Nothing's adding up. So I think probably, I don't want to speak for him, but, maybe for his safety or he wanted to get, us away from each other to just see, hey, is this a legit story? But he was cool the whole time and it was all good.
Yeah, that reminded me too. I think the first thing that he told us, right when you rolled down my windshield, was, hey, I'm not here to give you a ticket. I'm just wanting to get more information. So like from the start, he kind of like toned it down. And I think that's probably what helped you not be so nervous. But that guy was really chill. I don't know. I'm really glad it was you that was driving because I don't know what I would have said. You can't exactly say you're in a race. We're supposed to be going 10 miles an hour over. So
I said we were capped at 5. I fibbed
Yeah.
there a little bit.
Okay. But did you mention race? Did you tell him?
No, I said we were testing.
Okay.
We were in a big group testing it. I didn't use the word race, But I was
Good.
like, we got to see which cars are more efficient. It is a competition for time, but with speed limits, right? We can't go more than 5 over is what I said to him. And yeah,
Yeah. And you were in the car less than 10 minutes, right? I feel like it was like
yeah,
9 minutes that you were
yeah.
in
I
there,
think it
but
was, somewhere around there. I remember us talking about it, and I don't think either two of you had ever been pulled over before. So
well,
that was the first time. Yeah.
remember we said we hadn't, and then we were just like, "Actually, kind of." Like, I had been pulled over on a bike because I was riding in a dismount zone, but I don't know if you really count that. That was my first time even being in a car that got pulled over, so I'm like, "I don't know what to do." He came to my window too because it's safer that way. I'm like,
Yeah.
"I don't wanna say anything, I don't know." Like, I'm so nervous. So, yeah, I guess we kinda hadn't been pulled over, but yeah, I don't know. There's some, like, gray area in there.
Yeah. It worked out though.
Yeah, you did great. Thanks, Mike, for doing that.
My pleasure.
Oh, that's sweet. You guys lucky got away with just a verbal warning. Team EQS, we'll talk about this in our own episode, but also pulled over. What time of the day did you guys get pulled over?
Mid-morning, right?
I think it was like around lunchtime,
Yeah.
Okay.
not the middle of the night like you guys.
That was a little
great. When we were driving by, and I'm like, what are the odds that
Yeah.
there's another EQS? And I looked at Lacey. I think Corbin was trying to sleep, and I'm like, is that our EQS pulled over?
We
Yeah.
were so angry. It was us being pulled over, and I think it was Jordan. He was like, "Is that the Ioniq?" And just blasting past. And we're like, "No, like, come on." But yeah, just middle of the night, me and Jordan were sleeping and just woke up to the thud of the sidelines of the road.
Yeah.
And yeah, just got a ticket. But I want to know more. What was really your strategy going into this? Of course, right, a better route planner can give you options. We know that Ioniq has its own built-in route planner, but kind of going against that, right, we have Corbin who kind of understands the limits of the Ioniq 6. What was your full strategy?
Basically, it was just charge up enough within that 0 to 80% best charging experience zone and just hop from charger to charger. Obviously, out west, your options are much more limited. So you're basically stopping at every single high powered charger between Washington and Minnesota. Then once you get east of Minnesota, your options kind of open up. You can stop many more different places. But yeah, we basically, Mike would calculate how much based on our efficiency we needed. It got a lot less complicated once we got to South Dakota and we weren't dealing with elevation anymore. And so that really helped there. But as you saw in the spreadsheet, like most of our charging stops were between 0 and I think 80, 70% or something. So we weren't even trying to really push it to 80%. Typically, when we were leaving these stations, our charging speed was still well above 150 kilowatts, which some of the other teams are just barely hitting as their maximum charge rates. So the Ioniq 6 definitely delivered on that front. I think looking back now, there were definitely a few instances where I wish we added a little bit more so that we wouldn't have had to play with our speed as much. We wouldn't have had to play with turning off air conditioning. I think we only did that maybe twice though in the whole trip. So it wasn't like we were doing that all the time, but yeah, I think we lost a decent amount of time to lowering our speed just in those few stretches. But we didn't play with the built-in navigation system because Hyundai's navigation system would have absolutely screwed us on this trip. I don't know if we haven't talked to Genesis yet for the podcast. I'm not sure they used theirs either, but they're very comparable. I don't believe that they probably used it though.
I'll ask them because we'll actually have them on right after this. But did you guys ever question, right, that strategy up to 80, kind of go on as far as you can?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think overall, our strategy was, we'll use as much technology as we can to figure out, how we, leave as much time left in the tank as we need to get to the next spot. Again, I think there was only a couple times we made some miscalculations, but we had a lot of different things that we were using to figure it out, right? And we knew we needed to push it to really to put up a respectable time there. So we were using topographic maps to look at elevation change. We were using Windy to look at wind. we had our own internal, like just Excel trackers to figure out efficiency and how much we needed to charge to with buffer. So we were just combining a whole bunch of different sources. Corbin had the data scanner to see, what was below the pack and what the car was actually showing us underneath what it showed us on the software. So I think that was overall our strategy, and I don't think we ever really questioned it. We started pushing it a little bit harder, towards the end when it started getting closer, and we knew we needed to, it was like either now or never kind of deal. So
Yeah, and I wasn't really involved like in any of the planning. Like that was all Corbin and Mike. But I just remember Mike doing so many calculations throughout the whole trip. So for like a normal person that does road tripping, you're probably not gonna do these calculations. But Mike, can you like walk through exactly what you were doing with the efficiency and just like all the calculations you were doing?
Yeah, so in that was probably, I think Team Ioniq got a lot of good feedback in the comment section. The one comment I saw a bunch of times, kind of picking on us or calling out what people would have done differently was like, hey, just ride that flat charging curve and just sit there a little bit longer. You guys are pushing it too hard. And I think that was a strategic choice. Obviously Corbin's well acquainted with the car and knows how the thing charges better than I did. But as he mentioned, there weren't a lot of choices, right? So it wasn't like, oh, if we sat there from 68 to 80, that gets us somewhere else. That was just time that then we'd leave energy in the battery when we got somewhere else. And so what I used was, the first thing I did was just really simple. How many kilowatt hours are available in the battery? What is our efficiency that we are getting and or we expect to get? And then that would spit out, this is how much percent battery you need to get there. And then we would just add buffer, right? We want a 5% buffer, we want a 2% buffer. Or we would play with like, we'll lower the efficiency by, 1/10 of a mile per kilowatt to give us a little bit of a buffer. And, then it was just trying to understand what was ahead of us. Would we get better efficiency? Would we get worse efficiency? And how far do we need to go?
Yeah, and you would estimate the efficiency based on wind and topography, and that's where those factors came into play. Okay, that's good
Yeah.
to know. Thank you.
I would say that was the biggest mistake that I made throughout it, which is what caused our really the only true serious delay of time, which was that Chamberlain stretch where we came in. When I shouted out, as you said, we've been on zero for a long time, and there was elevation gain the whole time, so we saw it, but then we were going to lose a lot of elevation at the end. So I was banking on that loss of elevation at the end of it to help pick up efficiency. But the miss on my part was that was so far at the end of that stretch of road that by the time we would have gotten there, it might have been too late. And we didn't want to kind of rely on that. And then plus the very, very last, like 8 miles was a little bit more of a climb again. So when you zoomed out, it looked like, oh yeah, no worries. We'll scrub some elevation at the end. We'll be just fine. And then Corbin and I are looking at it. It was like, we're confident we're going to make it. We're no longer confident we're going to make it. So that was probably our biggest flub of the trip.
Yeah, we could have had a Team Lucid moment there.
I was worried. I was silently very worried that was going to be the case. And I'm like, I cannot be the one that causes us to be out of charge on the side of the road. So as we like to say throughout the entire thing, Corbin did a great job feathering it in.
Drink.
You guys are pretty confident. Other than that, I mean, you guys were pretty straightforward. Yeah, if there was another vehicle, let's go one by one. If there was another vehicle that you could pick to take this road trip on, what would it have been?
Any vehicle?
Any vehicle from the race.
Oh, from the race.
Yeah, from the race.
I mean, the i7 looked pretty plush. I would have loved to have been in the backseat of that i7 trying to sleep.
I would just say the winner. Like I would go in the Porsche Taycan. I mean, like that just seemed like it'd be cool to see that charging curve, especially compared to my Nissan Ariya, which is getting even worse charging right now for some reason. I'll have to do a separate podcast with you, Isaiah, on that one. But yeah, just seeing the rate over like 300 kilowatts would be really nice. So I'd love to try the Taycan.
Yeah. I think mine went in phases, right? Before we started talking cars, when I first knew I was going to get the invite to come out there, I was like, oh man, that i7 would be good. That's going to be a comfy ride. And then you start thinking about, it's probably going to be one of the slower in the thing. So comfort ride versus getting there and just sucking it up and getting there quick. And then I think Kyle sent out a thing to everybody in the group chat that was like, hey, if anybody has any strong preferences, hit me up. And I hit him on the side. I was like, listen, I'm kind of game for whatever, but if beggars can be choosers here, I'll take the Taycan. I knew it was going to do well. I didn't think it was going to do as well as it did do. But the other struggle with that is like, would that have been the most comfortable car to go, 2 straight days in? So the Taycan probably in retrospect would have been my pick to just be able to see something that can that closely compete with a gas car would have been pretty cool. And, to not make this, I picked every other car. The infrastructure still matters. We were fortunate, but there's something to be said for just having that reliability of the Tesla network and knowing it's a little bit more stress-free over that long a stretch of road where anything can happen.
Talking about that, what was your ranking of the podium? Who did you think would be first, second, third? Did you guys, even before the Lucid lost power and had to be towed, they were actually trailing kind of back. So what was your initial impressions of who would be first, second, third, fourth, fifth? And then through the race, who did you think would be the winner?
Obviously Taycan was going to take first place. And I knew just based on what was happening, if Lucid didn't die on the side of the road, we would have been neck and neck with them getting into Boston. It would have been down to the wire. And Model 3 might have been in there too. I wasn't too worried about you guys in the EQS. You guys seemed like you were firmly behind us at that point. And then Genesis 7,
Ouch.
Way back there. But yeah, I thought it was going to be down to the wire with Lucid for us.
Yeah, I got to be honest. If I would say I pretty firmly would have bet a good amount of money that the Lucid would have won, going into it. I thought the charging curve was better than it showed up and with its range, its efficiency, and what I still thought was close to best in class charging. I would have put a lot of money that Lucid was going to do it. I think Dave made the comment in Billings, right? It's like calling an election at 6:30. Right? Doesn't happen. Like this race is over. So we knew pretty early on that unless something outside of that car's control happened, it was going to be the Porsche.
Yeah, same as what Mike said, but for a different reason. I think I probably had the same misconception that most people have when it comes to EVs, most like of the layman community has, is better range equals better road tripping. And I didn't know the specs of any of these cars. I'm not a car girl. Like, I don't really like care that much about all that, about like every single car. So I didn't really know that much about all of their efficiencies and especially not their charging curves. So just knowing the range of the Lucid, I just thought that was gonna win. And clearly, like it didn't. But like I wonder what place it would have gotten if that call hadn't been made by the Lucid team. I feel like they probably would have beat us, but it would have been really close. What, you guys don't think so?
I disagree. That was a hot take.
Okay.
I wish I could have had a button to interject into their podcast when they were saying that they would have beat us. I think and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I think with the audible Corbin made when we switched up charging locations and the game plan for what we were going to do with our next charger before they ran out in Albany, I think we had them. And I think we finished out the way we intended to. They certainly did not. But before they ran out, their plan was to head to a different location in Albany than we were going to do, which would have put them just on and off, would have put them, 10 more minutes than it would have taken us for that stop, not including charging. So hot take, but I still think we had them even if all things were equal.
Awesome. Okay. Trying to think of any final closing remarks. I know, Mike, you just said like maybe we'll get into that. Do you want to elaborate more before we
Sure.
close out?
Yeah. So we were coming into just outside of Buffalo, and we were targeting going to the Victor, New York Electrify America, which with the Lucid being ahead of us, that was the station that they ultimately ended up going to. And as I was driving, Corbin was going through PlugShare, was going through EA, was just checking out what everything was looking like. And we saw there was only one 350 there. Lucid was on it. So our first question was like, well, maybe by the time they get there, they'll be off. We'll jump onto it. And then all of a sudden he's like, whoa, time out. Station is full. And now we're like, well, we may end up having to wait, period. So, Corbin started looking for plug share and found, what was it, the apple green that was literally right off the service plaza. On, off, it was 350s. I thought they were all 150s. So I wasn't even thinking about those. So I think that was the pivotal swing moment in the entire race when we said, let's switch this up. Let's go there. We got a great charge there. And then that's when we started thinking, we know they're headed to Albany. Dave told us, because we were talking to him on his phone, that was their plan, was to go to the same Albany we were. And then we started looking for another one and going, both Corbin and I had been to that EA station in Albany and knew it was kind of a disaster. It's in like a big plaza with a whole bunch of stuff going on. It was a Sunday afternoon, so, and it was pretty far off the highway. So we pivoted that was our Flying J, right? Was that the EV Go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and that was closer on and off. It was past Albany. And then we would have leapfrogged them at that point had they not run out of charge. And then at that point, we literally just needed to charge enough to get there. And, that was like a discussion. It's like, dude, if we're going to run out, I'm happy to run out at the finish line. We're not putting a single drop of energy more than we need in this car on that last stretch.
Yeah, and we rolled into Boston with what, like 1 or 2% left? It was pretty.
And it was only because of the traffic, right? I remember you the first 20 miles of the trip. You're like, I'm worried about this. This is getting bigger. This discrepancy, and I'm like, that is a problem for 130 miles from now. We will figure that out towards the end. And luckily it slowed down and the traffic helped us out. But even with that, I mean, it was, without that traffic, there was no shot we were making it.
Awesome. You guys, I would say, had pretty good communication. I think it was, if I were to like reorder the teams, it's not like I know everyone personally, but I think you guys would be together again, no matter the car. You guys seem to have a good chemistry going on. Now, GV80, which will be going on to next, they just wanted to tell me to tell you guys that they said hello. Do you guys have any thoughts about that vehicle performance? Any notes for them?
When watching their portions of the videos, there were some things I would definitely do differently. Just some of their charging techniques in terms of what they were stopping at and then moving on with. They're not what I would do with one of these cars, but they were their own team. They could make their own decisions.
Yeah. I think that's the tough part, right? Is when you're charging, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but when you're constantly arriving with higher states of charge, at some point you have 20% too much battery, right? Over the course of the race, and that time adds up. That means, that said, whether they could have been one spot more or not, I don't know. So I think having a stress-free trip for them was probably the right play, because pushing it a little bit harder, I don't know that it would have improved their position at all, right? Were they close to the next spot? Who was ahead of them?
Oh, let's even see exactly.
I had a screenshot of the standing somewhere.
I'm trying to get the exact times. Let's see how close. So
Was it the EQS? I just asked Jordan.
Genesis was almost 3 hours behind EQS, and then Lucid Air was an hour behind.
Oh,
So they were just kind of in their own little world there.
Yeah. There's nothing they could have done to scrub 3 hours over that trip. So that said, I retract my previous statement. I think they did exactly what they needed to. It was stress free. It was a chill ride. Well done, Team Genesis. Good job, guys.
They got to hang out with their pumpkin.
Yeah.
yeah.
It was fun
Good for
watching.
them
They were a fun team to watch, because I was actually surprised how bunched up we were for pretty much the entire race. I thought after that first charging stop, we would have spread out and it would have been us and us alone. Maybe you see one other car, but how many times we saw the Lucid, how many times we saw the Plaid, how many times we saw you guys. That was probably one of my biggest things that I never would have guessed, is just how bunched up the cars were, and a good chunk of the cars for a good chunk of the country.
Yeah.
One kind of final note I want to ask everybody, though, is like after the results, everybody seeing the results, would you recommend the Hyundai? Would you recommend that one? Would you recommend the Tesla Model 3? Would you recommend any of the other ones? Because I feel like Tesla is obviously a great answer, but also like the Ioniq is really competitive.
I don't think it's fair for me to comment on this.
Fair.
Yeah, that's a lose-lose for you right there. If you don't recommend it. I think somebody asked this right as we ended the race, and what I would say is I went in with, I'll be honest, pretty low expectations for the Ioniq. Never driven them, don't know much about them, didn't really follow, tried to do a crash course, watch some Corbin stuff before we left. But I had pretty low expectations, and it surprised me in just about every aspect. I was incredibly impressed with how that car did. Wish it had a little bit more features and benefits there, and the price point is good. That said, if you're daily commuting and you want anything other than a Tesla, and for whatever reason you're just like, Tesla's not my thing, I think the Hyundai is a great choice and you should absolutely do it. You will not be disappointed. If you want to go plug some tech in and just say, take me here, probably not your car. That said, I believe the Tesla Model 3 long range rear wheel drive was still a couple $1,000s less expensive than the base Ioniq 6.
Yeah, that's correct.
With that, it's technology, it's infrastructure. It's hard not to do that. I mean, Porsche is awesome, right? Like, I'd love nothing more than to have a Porsche, but you could buy, 3 Model 3s for the price of a Porsche. It's a tough swing to jump up to a Taycan from a Model 3.
I'll say the Ioniq is definitely a really good value. I mean, we look down to some of the gripes that I have with CCS infrastructure, like how the Tesla superchargers were really right off the exit. For a lot of the Electrify America stations, they were like 2 miles out from the exit, behind some sort of hotel or in a very weird location. And those few minutes definitely add up. But, for an offering, the Ioniq held up super, super well. And so, yeah, if you don't want a Tesla, you're looking for something else, you want to open up your options, I think the Ioniq 6 is a good value. And you guys proved that.
Yeah. What about you, Lacey?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to recommend the Model 3, but I mean, I didn't get a Model 3 and Kyle told me to, but I still didn't. And so maybe I'm one of those people that just doesn't get a Tesla just for no reason. But I definitely liked the Ioniq 6. Okay, literally
Jordan
just
with
bought
his
his
new Model 3.
with his new Model 3.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of like the other underdogs, and our underdog definitely underdogged. So I would recommend it. Like, it was a fun car. It was so spacious in the back. I was so comfortable. It was great. Also, I feel like we got really lucky with like all of our charging stops. We didn't have to wait for anybody to pull out really. Like, not no more than like a few minutes. That was extremely lucky. So do you guys think that would ever happen again? I feel like if we tried this again, it'd be really hard to beat this time. But what do you guys think?
We should try Thanksgiving weekend, this coming weekend. I bet the CCS stations are going to be an absolute nightmare, especially here on the East Coast.
Yeah. I mean, I put up something just the other day as I was looking at having to do a towing trip. And I pulled up EA at the time I was going to be coming through the day before, and almost everything around Metro New York, Connecticut was awful.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
we'll
no,
see.
we got lucky also being part of this team, and like people calling saying, "Hey, this station's full, go to a different one," or saying, "Hey, we're about to pull off this station. This charger works out of all 4 of them the best. So pull up into this one." And then they left right as we pulled up. So I feel like we got really lucky, but we also had great expertise from Mike and Corbin. But I wonder what would happen if we did this test again.
Yeah. I will say, because I saw Jordan in the background, right, his creative edit around Kyle giving him a hard time for stopping at the Dunkin' Donuts. And then he very quickly edited in and called us out for stopping. I would like the record to show that I suggested Corbin and Lacey walk to the Starbucks and I would pick them up after. And if you could have seen the looks on their faces when I suggested that, it was like,
We would have
okay.
lost so much time. Like, I could have ran. Like, it
I
was like a half
sprinted
the
back and
parking
forth to
lot.
McDonald's, and that did not do me any favors in the edit at the end, running with the bag of McDonald's.
The funny thing is that when we first got to that station, I got out of the car, I went to the Target, saw it was closed, and immediately made a beeline towards the Starbucks. And I got halfway there and I said, by the time I get there and back to the car, the charging stop is going to be done, and I'm going to just be like holding it up. So I think had we thought about it a little bit more, we probably could have avoided that delay there. And that was on me. Lacey, did you use the bathroom at that Starbucks?
I did,
Okay,
but
so it
yeah, I
wasn't just
saw how
me.
far it was, and like
I
it
stayed.
would have it would have added time. Like it was so far away. Like I could have jogged, but still, like it would have been a bad move.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we made the call to just wait, and I'm glad you came back. But yeah, Corbin, you did try, so it just didn't work.
Yep.
But yeah, I think we were more justified in our Starbucks stop than the Model 3 was in their Dunkin' Donuts stop. Throwing shade towards Jordan right
I
now.
can see the eyes. Yeah.
Jordan's face about that.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I think that kind of sums up all of my questions. Did you guys have any final remarks, thoughts?
I was quite happy with getting third place, getting on the podium, getting that bronze medal. That was good enough for me.
Yeah, I just want to share appreciation for the team. Like Corbin, thank you so much. All your expertise. Like you are the person to do this road trip with, especially in the car that we were in. And then Mike, you were insane with your calculations. And I also appreciate you doing your passenger duties, singing karaoke with me in the front for that really long stretch through the night. Really appreciate that. This was a great team. I love the chemistry that we had. So thank you guys so much. And also, thank you, Out of Spec, for having me on another adventure. This was awesome.
Yeah. I think that sums it up perfectly. The amount that went into it. And I think it was Ben who said that made it into the video. This is something we'll never forget. Being able to do something that big with this many different people. I flew out, and met everybody at dinner the first night, right? 30 people there. I only had met one person in this entire group in person before. So, to kind of pick up, fly across the country, and meet 29 other people who have similar interests, are crazy enough to do what we did, because none of my friends understood it for sure. So it was a blast, enjoyed it, happy with the way we finished, and would do it again in a heartbeat.
And I will add, if you want to just watch Team Ioniq 6 from start to finish, I'll have the unedited video on my channel going up this weekend of Thanksgiving.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you guys for joining me. I mean, it's been 2 months, and trying to get all these different teams together, it's definitely been a journey. But again, I don't think it's the last time I'll see any of you guys. I'd love to talk more, Ford Lightning with you, Mike. Lacey, we'll definitely have to do, you're over here. Lacey, we'll have to talk about the Nissan Aria, and Corbin, of course, with all of the changes from Hyundai and Kia lately. I'm sure I'll see you guys all again. But everyone's links will be in the description as well as Corbin's latest affiliated video. And when you release that, Corbin, I'll link it in the description as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me, Team Ioniq 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. Expect more of these episodes to go out. We still have to do, let's see here. Oh gosh. We still have to do i7, still have to do EQS, Acura. Of course, have to do the Genesis, the Taycan. We just did the Model S 85, got to do the Plaid. So there's a lot more of these coming out. And yeah, we hope to see you guys in the next one.